I've been trying for a while now to record a video kind of as an update on my previous video about this physics bug with Planet Nomads, and I think I have worked out the bugs on my video here. I discussed previously about how the frame rate in the game was dramatically different driving a vehicle versus not driving a vehicle. And before I did not have a frame rate counter, so I couldn't really show you the difference. You'll see I'm getting I'm averaging like 25, 27 FPS. I'm getting less than that right now, not driving a vehicle. And it doesn't matter if I turn the graphical settings way down. I can make the resolution, less than a quarter of what it is. The frame rate pretty much stays at that setting. I'm sitting on the lights on the side of the graphics card are on like 20%. It's probably under that for GPU usage. But if I drive a vehicle, I get down to like 12 FPS, sometimes less. It's dependent upon how fast you're driving. But the interesting thing, the reason why I wanted to do another video about it, is that I have discovered there's another variable. It appears as though this penalty is a lot steeper for vehicles that are heavier. Before, I assumed that it had to do with the number of blocks, which is why I observed pretty serious penalty driving close to that big station off in the distance. But if I drive this vehicle over here, which is not too much more complex than that one, but has these 4 chests on it, so it weighs almost like 1,000 more weight, it won't take much driving to get into a frame rate of the single digits. That was 5 FPS just then. At this speed, having trouble reading it. There's not a whole lot of contrast. Have it up there in the corner. I saw 4. I have gotten it down to as low as 2 frames per second just by driving this vehicle. I'm not even driving extremely fast. Like if I just drift down this hill here, I'm getting a frame rate in the single digits until, the vehicle stabilizes at a slower frame rate, or a slower speed, higher frame rate. The game does this pretty consistently with lots of vehicles. If your vehicle's sitting still, then you get a normal frame rate as if, the vehicle's not involved. And as soon as you start moving, it becomes a problem. And as I demonstrated in the other video, if you have a flying vehicle, if you fly at a certain altitude, where I assume the physics engine is not doing collision tests with ground objects like trees, then the performance is pretty normal there also. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that other Unity games like Liftoff, which is an FPV drone racing simulator, are also showing similar problems. With Liftoff, you can get a good frame rate with your drone on the ground and then get a terrible frame rate when you take off. But if you fly above the area, usually close to the world boundary where you're about to be brought back down by the software, then you get a normal frame rate again. It's kind of the same pattern as this, and that's another Unity game. So I believe this comes down to a problem with Unity's physics. But the really interesting thing is that I mentioned this bug on the Steam discussions forum for the Linux version of Liftoff. I play on Linux. I'm playing on Linux right now. Another user who plays Liftoff commented that he also has an AMD CPU, like what I'm using here, that he has a Ryzen 1st generation processor and a Ryzen 2nd generation processor. And he's able to play the game on both, but he gets this terrible performance problem with the 2nd gen processor, but not with the 1st gen processor. And that was really intriguing because those are very, very similar builds. I actually checked into the CPU flags on the 1st gen Ryzen processor that he mentioned and on the processor I have as a reference for a 2nd gen chip. And they have the same CPU flags, so I would assume that means they support all of the same instructions. So if the two processors support the same instructions, they should not offer radically different performance on the same task, other than, differences in clock speed and things of that nature. Fairly obvious differences. And those differences should have gone, to the favor of my 2990WX Threadripper. So in theory, this processor getting less performance than a 1900X kind of sounds to me like it is a CPU detection bug in Unity's physics. Either the physics itself, the physics engine, is programmed to use a couple of different strategies for optimization depending on what family of processor it's dealing with, or perhaps the compiler toolchain that built it has that kind of feature built in which would have the same purpose. Either way, wherever the CPU detection is occurring, if it's not matching Ryzen 2nd gen chips, it might be defaulting to some very poorly optimized code that it just uses on CPUs it doesn't recognize. And maybe this whole problem is due to the Planet Nomads and Liftoff and things of that nature running on this wrong code compared to the correct code that is matched with the Ryzen 1st gen chips. It'd be interesting if anybody in the comment section can chime in as to whether they are seeing this on other processors that are not AMD processors. Maybe if you are playing on Linux and you are having this problem versus whether you are having this problem on Windows. I'm really curious if anybody else is having results that would confirm the suspicion that this is a Linux-only bug as of right now, and whether or not that would confirm that this is a bug limited to recent processors that maybe aren't picked up in some CPU detection list right now. But that's about all I have to update regarding the issue. I haven't figured out how to work around it other than, build insanely tiny vehicles like this so that the costs associated with them are affordable to where you can play the game. And frankly, that's a bit of a buzzkill for a game where the entire purpose, of playing is that you travel the world trying to build these bigger, more useful bases. You collect more material, you build bigger machines, you figure out the logistics of how you're traveling around the planet with it, and so on. It's kind of hard to be a planet nomad while you have to leave things behind, because if your mobile base gets any bigger, you can't drive it. Anyway, I digress. Thank you for watching. Like I said, feel free to comment if you have any information about whether this is happening to you with Planet Nomads and what kind of system you're dealing with, or whether this is happening with other Unity games, because I suspect there will probably be a few people who will chime in that they've encountered this bug in other games.